The rain poured heavily over the grand mansion that stood tall in the wealthy suburbs of New York. Its white pillars and elegant glass windows reflected a life of luxury, yet just outside its gates, beneath a wide oak tree, sat two figures who seemed entirely out of place in this world of wealth. An old man and an old woman leaned against the tree trunk, their clothes soaked and stained with mud. The man's rough, calloused hands trembled as he held his wife's frail fingers. Her head rested gently on his shoulder, her gray hair wet and sticking to her wrinkled face. They had nothing with them except an old suitcase, torn at the edges, heavy not with gold or silver, but with memories. Inside that suitcase were faded photographs, yellowed letters, and little fragments of a life that once promised joy. One particular photograph was framed, placed carefully on top. It showed a young boy smiling brightly, wearing a school uniform. The boy had been the center of their universe. That boy had grown up. He was now the man in the expensive suit standing by a black luxury car, just a few feet away. His face was tense, conflicted. Rain dripped down his neatly combed hair as he looked at the two figures, his parents. But he did not step closer. Early days. A house built on love. Years ago. Before the wrinkles, before the silence, before the pain, this couple had been full of dreams. Their names were William Carter and Margaret Carter. William was once a factory worker, strong and proud, with grease-stained hands that built machines and carried the weight of long shifts. Margaret was a school teacher, gentle yet firm, who filled her home with books, lullabies, and warm meals even when money was scarce. They had one child, Daniel Carter. Daniel was their miracle, their pride. They would often stay awake at night discussing his future. Margaret wanted him to be a doctor, someone who could heal the broken. William hoped he would become a lawyer, a man of justice. But more than careers, they wanted him to grow with values, kindness, humility, respect. Life, however, was not easy. The Carters lived in a small two-bedroom house in the working-class side of town. Rent was high, wages were low. There were winters when William skipped meals so Daniel could eat, and summers when Margaret sold her jewelry to pay for Daniel's schoolbooks. But every sacrifice was made with a smile. Every tear was hidden behind laughter. Because they believed their boy was worth it all. The suitcase of memories. That very suitcase lying in the rain had once been Margaret's wedding gift. It carried not just clothes but entire chapters of their lives. A pair of tiny baby shoes Daniel wore when he took his first steps. His kindergarten drawings, colorful scribbles saying, "I love you Mom and Dad." Old report cards with proud red marks and gold stars. Family photographs from beach trips they could barely afford but cherished deeply. Every item was a reminder, we gave everything to raise you. The growing distance. Daniel had been different as a child. He was brilliant, sharp, and ambitious. His teachers called him gifted, and his parents worked extra shifts to pay for his private school tuition. But as Daniel grew older, something changed. Surrounded by classmates from wealthy families, he began to notice the difference between his life and theirs. His friends lived in big houses with swimming pools. They wore expensive clothes. They arrived at school in shiny cars, while his parents dropped him off in their old rusty pickup. At first, he was embarrassed. Then, slowly, he grew resentful. By high school, he no longer invited his parents to events. At graduation, William and Margaret sat quietly in the back row, clapping with tears in their eyes, while Daniel posed for photographs with friends, barely acknowledging them. Margaret would whisper to William, "He's just shy. Maybe he doesn't want to show too much emotion in front of others." But William knew. He saw the way Daniel's eyes avoided theirs. He felt the distance growing. The rise of Daniel. Daniel was a star. He earned a scholarship to an Ivy League university, studied business and finance, and quickly rose through the corporate world. By the age of 30, he was a millionaire. Suits tailored in Italy, cars imported from Germany, an office overlooking Manhattan. The Carters were proud, of course. They told everyone in their neighborhood, "Our son made it. He's living the American dream." But Daniel stopped visiting. Phone calls became rare. Holidays were spent elsewhere. When he did come, it was quick, formal, like a stranger dropping by. His conversations were shallow. "Yes, work is busy." "No, I can't stay for dinner." "Please don't tell me to eat more, Mom, I'm fine." Margaret tried to hide her tears in the kitchen. William tried to keep his pride, but inside, his heart ached. The present moment, now, years later, it had come to this. The old couple sat outside the mansion Daniel owned, not even invited inside. Their clothes were dirty from the long walk. Their health was failing, yet they had come. Not for money, not for luxury, but for love. They wanted to see their son. And Daniel, he stood by his car, rain soaking through his expensive suit, his chest heavy with emotions he refused to show. Behind him, inside the mansion, his wife watched from the window, disapproving. The old suitcase sat open, the red arrow of fate pointing at the photograph of young Daniel. That smiling boy had once promised, "I'll take care of you when I grow up." Now that promise was broken. And the chapter ends with silence. Only the sound of rain falling, and the beating of three hearts, separated by pride, by time, and by choices. The rain did not stop. It seemed as though the heavens themselves were mourning, pouring down sorrow onto the world below. William and Margaret remained under the oak tree, shivering but silent, while their son Daniel stood motionless, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. Inside Daniel's chest, a storm raged louder than the thunder above. The weight of wealth. When Daniel first achieved success, he felt powerful. Money, status, recognition, all of it gave him the sense of control he had long craved as a boy. He no longer had to feel small or embarrassed. The world respected him, but with wealth came a new environment. Boardrooms filled with cold-eyed men, society dinners where every word was calculated, and relationships measured by profit. It was in this world that Daniel met Clara, the woman who would become his wife. She was elegant, graceful, born into privilege. Her father owned businesses across the country, and her family lived in mansions that made Daniel's childhood home look like a shed. Clara was everything Daniel thought he needed to erase his past. She represented a door into the world of the elite, a chance to rewrite his story. But Clara, like the circles she moved in, carried a quiet disdain for anything, or anyone, that didn't fit their polished image. Especially Daniel's parents. The first fracture. In the early days of their marriage, Clara had tried to be polite. When William and Margaret visited their son's new apartment, Clara would greet them with a thin smile, offer tea, and excuse herself. But Daniel could feel it. The awkward silence, the way Clara's eyes judged their simple clothes, their working-class manners. One night, after his parents had left, Clara finally spoke her mind. "Daniel, I don't mean to be unkind, but they don't belong here. They make people uncomfortable. My friends noticed. Don't you think it's time you set some boundaries?" Daniel froze. His first instinct was to defend them, to shout that they had sacrificed everything for him. But then, pride whispered, "She's right. They don't fit into this world. And you've worked too hard to go back." So he said nothing. Silence became complicity. The visit that changed everything. Months later, William and Margaret arrived unexpectedly at Daniel's mansion. They had brought the old suitcase, filled with memories, thinking perhaps their son would appreciate seeing pieces of his past. Margaret carried a warm pie she had baked, just like she used to when Daniel was a boy studying late into the night. William wore his best shirt, pressed neatly though it was decades old. They stood at the massive front door, nervous but hopeful. When Clara opened it, her smile was cold. "Oh, you came without calling." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she held out the pie. "We just thought we'd surprise you. We haven't seen Daniel in so long." Clara's lips curved, but her eyes were sharp. "Daniel's busy. He has meetings. You can't just show up like this." From the hallway, Daniel appeared. His tie loosened, his face tired. He looked at his parents, and for a moment, the boy inside him screamed to run into their arms. But Clara's presence weighed on him. Her world demanded composure, so he forced a polite smile. "Mom, Dad, you should have called. I don't have time today." The pie trembled in Margaret's hands. "We just wanted to see you, Danny. Just for a few minutes." Clara stepped forward. "Daniel, you'll be late. We really can't entertain unplanned visits." And in that moment, Daniel made a choice that would haunt him forever. He nodded. He let his wife close the door. William and Margaret walked back down the driveway, holding the suitcase tightly, rain beginning to fall. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. But something inside them broke. Hunger and humiliation. Weeks turned into months. The Carters' health worsened. William's back pain grew unbearable from years of factory work, and Margaret's heart condition weakened her. Their small pension barely covered rent and medicine. Still, they never asked Daniel for money. Not once. Pride kept them silent. Love kept them patient. They only wanted his presence, not his wealth. But Daniel avoided them. Calls went unanswered. Invitations were never sent. Until one day, the landlord came knocking. Their savings were gone. They had no choice but to leave their small apartment. Homeless, with only their suitcase of memories, they decided to go to the one place that had once been theirs by heart, if not by deed, Daniel's home. The breaking point, and so here they were now, sitting in the rain under the oak tree, outside the mansion their son owned. Too ashamed to knock, too desperate to leave. Inside the house, Clara was furious. She pulled Daniel aside, her voice sharp. "Are you going to let them sit out there? Do you realize what the neighbors will think? They look like beggars." "They're my parents," Daniel said quietly, his fists clenched. "They're a burden," Clara snapped. "If you bring them in, they'll never leave. Do you want to throw away everything you've built? Your reputation, our life?" Daniel's chest tightened. He remembered the nights his father skipped meals so he could eat. He remembered his mother staying awake to mend his clothes. He remembered their laughter, their sacrifices, their unconditional love. And yet, He also remembered the mocking whispers of his colleagues when they had once seen his parents at a company event. Those are his parents. No wonder he's obsessed with money. Shame drowned out gratitude. Pride silenced love. Daniel walked outside, rain hitting his face. He stood in front of them, his shadow looming over the suitcase. Of memories. Mom, Dad, he began, his voice shaking. You can't stay here. This isn't the place for you. Margaret looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Danny, where should we go? We have nowhere left. Daniel swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. I'll figure something out. But not here. Please, just go. William's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to curse, to break through his son's wall of pride. But years of love kept him silent. He simply nodded, held his wife's trembling hand, and whispered, "Come, Margaret. Let's not make this harder." The rain washed over them as they slowly rose, leaving the suitcase behind. Daniel stood frozen, watching them walk away, every step carving a wound into his soul. The suitcase lay open in the grass. Inside, the photograph of a smiling boy stared up at him. The boy he used to be, the boy who had once promised, "I'll take care of you." And for the first time in years, Daniel felt truly empty. The storm had passed, but the earth still carried its wounds. Puddles glistening under the dim streetlights, branches broken across the road, and the heavy silence of a night that had wept. On the Carter mansion's driveway, the old suitcase lay open, its contents scattered. A child's shoes, faded letters, wrinkled photographs. All reminders of a promise once made. A few streets away, two frail figures shuffled slowly through the night. William and Margaret Carter had no strength left, yet they pressed on, leaning on each other. Behind them, their son Daniel remained frozen near the oak tree, torn between pride and love, his heart heavier than the rain-soaked sky. The silent night. By midnight, William and Margaret had found a bench in a deserted park. It was damp, the wood rotting, but it was shelter of a kind. William wrapped his thin arms around his wife, trying to shield her from the biting cold. Margaret's lips trembled. Her voice was weak, but filled with tenderness. "Do you remember, William, when Danny was little, and he'd run out into the rain? We'd chase him with an umbrella, laughing as he splashed in the puddles." William's eyes burned, but he forced a smile. "Yes, those were good days. We were drenched in rain, but our hearts were full. Tonight, it feels like we're drowning in silence." Margaret's breath grew shallow. "I don't think I have much strength left." William held her hand tightly, his own body trembling. "Don't say that. Hold on. For me. For Danny." The awakening. Back at the mansion, Daniel sat alone in his study. In his hands was an old photograph he had pulled from the suitcase, the image of a smiling boy, standing proudly between his parents. Memories flooded in. His father working double shifts to buy him new shoes. His mother selling her jewelry to pay his tuition. Their laughter at the dinner table, even when there was barely enough food. Daniel's chest tightened. For years, he had convinced himself that money and status defined worth. But in that moment, staring at his parents' love captured in fading ink, he realized the truth. His wife, Clara, entered the room. Her voice was sharp. "Daniel, forget them. They'll drag us down. Think about our reputation." Daniel rose to his feet, anger burning in his eyes. "Reputation? What about the nights my father went hungry so I could eat? What about my mother's sacrifices? Is that not worth more than reputation? Clara blinked, stunned. But Daniel was already walking away. The search. He ran into the night, his polished shoes splashing through puddles. For the first time in years, he felt desperate. Not for deals, not for profits, but for love. Dad, Mom. His voice echoed down empty streets. Finally, in the park, he saw them. Under the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, William sat on the bench, holding Margaret against his chest. Her eyes were closed, her body limp. Daniel's heart shattered. Mom, Dad. He dropped to his knees beside them. William looked up, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Why now, son? We were always a burden to you, weren't we? Daniel's tears streamed freely. He took his father's hand. No, I was blind. I was foolish. Please, forgive me. Margaret stirred, opening her tired eyes. A faint smile touched her lips. There's nothing to forgive, Danny. Parents never hold anger against their children. The final redemption. Daniel ripped off his suit jacket and wrapped it around his mother. With trembling hands, he hailed a cab and rushed them to the hospital. Doctors worked frantically. Hours passed in torment. Finally, they emerged with weary smiles. She's weak, but she'll survive. You brought her just in time. Relief broke Daniel's chest. He held his father's hand firmly, whispering through tears. From now on, you'll never be alone. This house, this life, everything I have is yours. I am nothing without you. William's eyes softened. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in his son again. Epilogue. The House of Love. Weeks later, the Carter mansion was no longer silent. Laughter filled its halls, carried by the voices of the two people who had once raised a boy with nothing but love. Daniel transformed one of the grand rooms into a gallery of memories. The old suitcase sat proudly in the center, its treasures displayed on the walls. Each photograph reminded him of where he came from, and the people who had made him. Even Clara, though reluctant at first, began to soften. She saw the peace in her husband's eyes, the joy that wealth alone had never given him. Slowly, she accepted that true legacy was not found in riches, but in roots. And Daniel, every day, he rose with gratitude. Every night, he thanked the heavens for one more chance to honor the two people who had given him everything. The final line, success without gratitude is emptiness, and wealth without love is poverty. In the end, the only true mansion a man can build is the home within his parents' hearts.